Hello everyone, this is Daily Philosopher here, and today I'm going to talk about the absurdity of distractions. Okay, so in our lives, especially in the modern life, we have all sorts of distractions, such as checking your smartphone, checking your social media, your favorite TV show on Netflix, for example, and we check a lot of things like this, and it's become a modern way of living, right? What I argue here today is that this all is a form of distraction because we spend so little time reflecting on ourselves, right? Like we don't face ourselves, and you may be wonder, you may be wondering why do we have so many problems, right? And what exactly is the problem? I do this and do that. I check my social media. I check my accounts everywhere, and I watch TV, and still I don't feel happy, right? I even go out. I travel somewhere, right? I travel to Paris. I travel to Tokyo. I travel to the United States, and it's all the same. Like, yeah, you get some excitement, right, when you see the Grand Canyon, for example, or the Eiffel Tower. Then so what? It's like, yeah, it's good and it distracts you for a while, right? It's like firework, but after the firework bursts, what should we do? We maybe have to really ask us about that, right? Ask ourselves about that. And I would say, actually, what your problems are is who you are. And to see who you really are, you really have to give yourself some time. I'm not saying you cannot be distracted. I think it's hyper hard to do. I don't have the ability to completely ban every single form of distractions. If I want to do that, I would have to quit my work and become a monk, for example. So I think that's hyper hard. But what we can do here is to really sit down and to just pause and to feel who you are, right? That's meditating. And when you meditate, you either, count your breath, right? Like inhale and exhale, right? And in here, you part of your awareness can also watch what your problems are, right? Your anxiety about money, about, I sometimes say our life is, all of our anxiety is kind of like a giant form of FOMO, fear of missing out, right? If you really look into this, why do we do what we do? Why do we work? Yeah, we need to eat, of course, but a lot of, unconscious reasons why we actually work and, find a mate, right? Find a partner, go out and hang out with friends, is a big chunk of fear of missing out, right? Because we intuitively understand our life is finite. So we kind of like want to, because of our fear of death, we want to make the most out of it, right? But we also understand no matter how hard we try, we cannot make the most out of it and make the most of it and just stop the dying process, right? Actually, we are dying, if you will, because the moment we are born, up until now, and we will continue to die. It's just like our life is a slow dying process, right? And so a lot of fear stems from this, right? Our fear of finance, worry about whether or not we have a, really poor later life when we old, when we age. And also we worry about finding a partner. I'm not married, so sometimes I have this fear. Doesn't matter if I consider marriage important in the long run, I think it's still, if I'm being really honest, we all have this, right? Even for people who just don't want to get married and have kids, they have this worry, right? About, what if, right? What if I got married, right? It would be fun. I don't know, but maybe um, you still continue to feel bored, so on and so forth. What I'm trying to say is all this is a big form of FOMO, fear of missing out, right? We all try to find a way to do enough so that we don't feel that we are wasting our life. And ultimately, we all, doesn't matter if you're super rich, doesn't really matter if you were Donald Trump or Elon Musk, you will die. So our life is a dying process. Failing to know that and be aware of the fact can create unnecessary suffering because you're distracting yourself, so it seems as if you're forgetting about this truth, right? Temporarily. Yeah, you get really excited, you get really thrilled. It's like a roller coaster, right? When you're riding on the when you have a we're having a roller coaster ride, it's like, yeah, it's so fun, but after which you still have to face yourself. And you often at the moment you have to face yourself again, you create, or the whole mechanism just creates more unnecessary suffering, because now what, right? You've been staying unprepared and unaware of this suffering, and the inherent struggle that is intertwined with your living, with your structure as a human being, right? And now you have to face it again. It's just much harder and that much painful because you've been neglecting the whole process for long. Like I said in last video, but in this video I just want to stress this again. You were like that kid, right, who just squandered 7 days before the test to just play and does not study at all, and on the day of the test he just don't know what to do, right? Because he's staying distracting himself and kind of like trying to forget, sometimes imperfectly, right? He still feel the pain, but mostly he could like distract himself. But on that day he want to face it, it's just that much painful, because compared to the kid who's smarter, who's like being constant aware of the test and really study, he is so unprepared, but they both face the same fates, right? But just like in the case of the first kid, he would feel much more suffering and struggle in the case, because he created unnecessary suffering and struggle for himself. And we do this like almost every single day, right? It's like when we eat, we want to, watch some Netflix instead of like, facing ourselves and be aware of our eating and all our desire. Have you ever noticed why people really need to eat when they also watch like football games, Super Bowl, for example? Well, I would argue that is because the Super Bowl or the TV or the food by themselves are strong, but not strong enough to completely, block your anxiety and desire and things that basically a mixture of your struggle. And in order to block that struggle, you basically have to use more stimuli, right? And that would be a really painful process. I mean, like, yeah, it feels nice when you kind of like numb yourself with Super Bowl plus popcorn. I really like that. I have my favorite of digital distraction that I use, and I still do them from time to time because they are comfortable. But every single time, I don't miss even one time that I have to accept the price afterwards, and it's not that a good of a price to pay, right? Like, yeah, you kind of like mentally become strong, right? Drunk, right? It's like you've been drinking, and you know after drinking, you always have the hangover. So that's basically what we are facing. So if you've been long enough in this, I think you will reduce the amount of distractions mechanisms you use, because little by little it starts to become clear that, hey, it's absurd to use so much distraction when the struggle is the only way, right? Because the struggle is the primary thing. The suffering is the primary thing, because you are born as a sacrifice. As said in David Data's book, The Way of the Superior Man, he mentioned that we are born as a sacrifice, because when we are born, also the Buddha also said something along the lines of this, right? When we are born, we're destined to die. So the whole life is a dying process. You either, as David Data said, participate in the process, right? Participate in the sacrifice, or you can sort of like be against it, right? Like you mentally just want to get away from it, and you're trying to escape from something that is unescapable, and that creates a tremendous amount of suffering. And in the modern time, let's escaping would be checking your social media, go out and travel, and make friends, talking to people, right? That's why in Buddhism they promote noble silence, right? Because when we talk, we seldom talk without a hidden agenda, right? We talk to gain something. We talk to gain validation. We talk to gain approval, or at least we want a certain outcome, right? To reduce the amount of suffering and boredom that we experience. So yeah, all of it is a form of struggle if you're a form of distraction if you really are being honest. Doesn't mean that you start from now cannot no longer do all those things. You can still do many of those. It's just that the end of the day, maybe it starts to become clear that to try to mentally use the distractions to block the inherent struggle that you have, or inherent suffering, if you will, starts to become more and more absurd, because basically you're trying to fight an unwinnable war, if you're being honest, right? Because so much has been intertwined with that inner inherent struggle. Wouldn't it be nice to just accept it, or try to accept it more, instead of like trying to look away? Because no matter how hard you try to look away, it's still there. It's there because it's part of the inherent structure of human life, right? Once we're born, we're destined to age, right? We get older and older, and we will die one day, no matter how fun your life is. So that's why life is never that fun in the first place, because even if your life is fun and exciting and everyone loves you, one day it will end. So that taps into the impermanence of things, right? So that impermanence of life, and the fact that we have a finite life, just start to ruin anything, right? If you're being honest, we always claim that, hey, we don't only cherish the moment, we don't care whether it lasts or not. But that's not really true, because as human beings, we cherish and attach to things that we feel nice about, right? Once we love a person, we want the love to continue and to stay forever, and things like that, right? Once we have a powerful social status, we want to maintain it. But at the end of the day, it will be all gone. And that is the reason why our life is not that fun, right? Because even if your life is genuinely fun, and your life is a nice life, the fact that it will end starts to ruin it. And you cannot separate the two things, because they're intertwined. You cannot at the same time cherish the thing and not be aware of the fact that it will end. And even if you're talking about brain science, like dopamine, how dopamine work, right? Yeah, you feel the pleasure, you feel the excitement, but one day it will end, right? Because ultimately your dopamine level will drop, right? Sometimes even it becomes a trough, right? it drops so quickly, and there's a mirror image, right? I think I'm not getting into this too deeply about this dopamine thing, but you know what I mean. Always after a peak, there's a trough. So that's why we still continue to suffer. All right, I think I've talked about talk too much about this for this video. What I want to stress here finally is that when you are doing meditating and you're meditating, the more and more you spend time watching yourself and watching the mechanism of your life, more and more you start to feel, hey, maybe distractions are not the way. And maybe watching yourself is the source of insight, right? The insight cannot stop you becoming invincible and stop or pause your dying process, because that's structural. But the process of becoming more aware and using less and less distractions does help you become more intelligent, or at least at least wiser, right? And in this case, it can really help you. It helps you become more in peace with your life, right? Instead of trying to mentally escape from something that is unescapable, you learn to be with the unescapable, right? You learn to be with your inner struggle. You learn to, basically get along with your inner struggle and the inherent struggle, right? And that, I would argue, is a much better life to live. And the distractions are just futile, and they create so much unnecessary suffering. It makes you an unhappy person, basically. So I think you can still make friends, you can still have kids, get married, and try to do this and that, make a lot of money. It's just that you don't want to mistaken their power, right? Like, they just don't have these activities. They are distractions. They don't have the ability to end the inner struggle that you have, unless you can at first become someone who just doesn't age and who doesn't die, and you have like a infinite amount of life to live. Maybe if you could have this ability, we can talk about maybe it's possible for you to become to enjoy happiness forever. I highly doubt it, even if that were the case. But since people don't have the ability, so the struggle is inherent, right? So no one can escape it. So that's why I'm 100% sure even the super rich like Elon Musk, or super powerful like Putin, Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, or Donald Trump, the American president, they all have their share of inner struggle and inner suffering, like, because their life, like every one of us, is finite, right? And that's the biggest one, because so much formal fear of missing out is deeply connected to the fact that we have a finite life. I think I will talk more about this. All right, so this is already pretty long, close to 20 minutes. I think I'll see you next time. Bye.